Hello, and welcome to the Full of Ship podcast, real answers to real problems, with your host, Kyle Henderson, CEO and co-founder of Vision API, a podcast dedicated to demystify the chaotic, often turbulent world of ocean freight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Full of Ship podcast. I am joined by my guest, Eric Johnson, Senior Technology Editor at the Journal of Commerce. Eric and I will be continuing our conversation about data quality and fidelity challenges, what shipping mode datasets are currently in demand by the industry, what's the status of platform-ization of global logistics, and a sneak peek at the first ever TPM tech. Let's take a slight turn here. We had a topic we were interested in chatting with you about around kind of like data in the space, APIs, data transfers, things such as like, are the forwarders good stewards of the data, or is there space for analysts and companies that synthesize this data in some way, shape, or form? What are you seeing right now in terms of this space, and why has it been so historically difficult to share data or get the data you need to do your job? Maybe I'll leave it like that. Why has it been so tough to get the data you need to do your job?
So I defended container lines earlier. I will say, and I'm not going to take a shot at container lines directly. I will use a shipper that told me this a long time ago, and it sticks in my head as a cipher for this. A shipper, I remember this super distinctly, said to me, if my shipments arrived when they were supposed to, with the transit time that was agreed upon when I made the contract with the container line, I would not need a visibility system. Right? Like I could just count on I flip on the light switch and the bulbs come on, and I don't need to address it unless one of them is not coming on. Right? So if everything flowed as expected or close to as expected, there would be virtually no demand for visibility. Right? The reality is that it's a physical world. And we talked about the congestion, but even in kind of more settled times, there's port strikes, there's weather.
Yeah. There's always an exception rate that you expect.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. The expectation is that there are going to be exceptions, right? And even if it's 5 out of 100, you can't just write off 5% of your shipments, right, as being unreliable. So the need is what drives. That is what drives the need. Now, why has it been hard to get that data? Well, if it was easy and it didn't cost a lot to do it, the container lines might do it themselves. They might not. They might not like providing, concrete evidence of their underperformance. So that's part of the reason why that data has been hard to come by. Right? The container lines are not in a big hurry to give explicit details about how they have not met the promises in their contracts. And the structure of the data is, again, we talked about fragmentation, right? There's lots of different systems. If I'm a shipper right now, say I'm an importer, and I want to go out in the market and get good visibility data, I can turn to probably 7,000 companies. I'm just throwing a number out there. It might be 70,000 companies. Probably is 70,000. They are all either using data they generated themselves, or they're aggregating data from some other provider who is originating the data, right? But the quality of it, I don't really have a solid way of seeing that until I see it in practice and I measure it against some other, form of that same data, right? So there's just a lot of kind of like basically lab work that gets done without any roadmap for what a good end result is. Now, a lot of that has changed in the last 2 to 3 years. You mentioned APIs. This is something that I felt like not a lot of people were paying attention to 5-6 years ago. And there's now, I won't say there's a lot more attention to it. And I think more importantly, people talk about APIs as sort of like in passing rather than what's an API. It's like, well, yeah, of course we're striving to use APIs. 5-6 years ago, I bet if you interviewed 100 people in global shipping about what an API was, and they weren't in programming, maybe 5 would know. I mean, honestly, like
no, it's completely fair. I mean, there was no need to have that information in that space in that industry, right? Like I shouldn't expect someone who's never encountered something to know something about it, right? I mean, like on the humorous side, we work with APIs a lot here at Vision, so
right.
But we hear pronunciations like appy quite often, so you can get a sense pretty quickly of what the exposure to building software or delivering software to an industry, and how far has that happened for this industry pretty quickly just in having conversations with folks. Like my background was not in supply chain logistics before I got this. It was always in analytics companies or mapping, usually around some type of internet business of some sort. And it's, things that we just kind of take as, the status quo, that's, table stakes, are things I haven't even seen exist yet in this industry. So it's been interesting in that regard as I've been more exposed.
People, when I was first writing about APIs, and I sort of, and the importance of them as sort of foundational elements of broader systems that they might use, I would use the Google Maps, right, analogy, like, oh, well, how you can figure out how to get to your favorite restaurant is because Google Maps API is, pumping that information into another tool that you're using, right? It didn't just magically appear. And the tool you're using didn't come up with their own mapping technology, right? Like, so all that stuff that was happening on their phone, that was a good way to kind of like get their head aligned.
APIs have actually made that possible.
Correct.
To get answers that quickly.
Correct.
And that I think that's also something that's often looked over in kind of like the underlying data structure and pipes behind the industry. Similar to how you were talking about port congestion before, it's tough to make improvements rapidly when you need so many parties to converse with one another. And they're kind of working in real time, like who's calling who and asking questions, et cetera, et cetera. Well, imagine if that system, people could like speak to each other instantly and get very specific answers to this very specific question they asked. That's effectively APIs at the end of the day. And then you can actually like scale that. And the space has been interesting because I'm not saying that APIs are the 100% solution type thing, but from looking at like how the space has evolved over time in terms of like data technologies, it becomes quite understandable to see why there's so much disparity between not just between like types of companies, but even companies inside like verticals and categories. And it's, to make my analogy, like you probably played the game of telephone as a child, right? Well, conceptually, you were passing data from point A to point Z, and the mechanism of passing it is very comparable from a game of telephone to the supply chain logistics industry. I have distinct parties who are trying to communicate information to another party, and I'm going to have degradation in the information if there aren't like standards, if things aren't made to be relatively instant, if things aren't well structured. It's just all going to break down at the end of the day. And that's part of what I feel like what I encounter in this space is we see the organically built up differing technology solutions that have, it's almost like a mountain of Band-Aids again and again and again in many different places. And granted, there's like been like big surges, like, kind of, when EDI first started to kind of emerge, it was early in this, but like really starting to get kind of more big in the like late 80s into the 90s, vans, et cetera. And then there was starting to be a transition. Okay, we want to get like, SOAP and XML. Maybe we can, get better by doing everything in XML. And now it's like, well, okay, we actually need systems to speak to one another in real time so they can make decisions where humans aren't needed to make that decision right then and there. How do we transfer manual activities to automation? But where did I start?
So let me mention two things. I think there's the role. Like, are you talking to someone in a CIO or, his or her teams about this stuff? Because that's a different conversation than logistics professional or
yes, the operators,
freight forwarding, chief operating officer, and going, APIs are important because now that's changed, obviously, but still, like, you're going to get a lot more traction with someone who understands the underlying, kind of infrastructure better. Second, and really relevant to your space is the processes, the human processes are hard to break. So I'll give you an example. Terminal operator I spoke to recently. This is 2020, end of 2021. We're almost in 2022. And he said, we have a portal that lets you know when a container is available. We will send proactive messages out to who we have noted as the drayage operator attached to that box. You as the drayage operator or the BCO, the shipper, can check a portal saying that box is available. We still get people calling the terminal, asking on a phone call, asking, hey, is this box available? Which is somewhat analogous to me calling up Dulles Airport and saying, hey, has American Flight 2048 arrived yet? At the gate? Yep. Are the passengers available for pickup, right? Like, sometimes the technology is not as far behind as we think it is. It's very fragmented. There's no Sabre in global shipping, but it's not as far behind as we think it is, as much as the mental processes are still like hard coded in people's brains. That's the problem. And
with an industry so by design heavily fragmented, it seems like there's always going to be a challenge with adoption.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Especially on a single platform. They may adopt.
Oh, yeah.
You may get them to come around to adopt, but they'll adopt the wrong, quote unquote, wrong platform, right? So that's totally a challenge I don't know we ever get around, honestly.
Do you think things are changing from the perspective of are the companies in this space, so the carriers, the forwarders, even some of the software companies, and maybe let's leave out the software companies, are perspectives changing on investing in technology and what they should be expecting, and is that investment increasing? Like, how are perspectives changing on adopting technology into the space?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, it's really tough to tell in terms of like actual quantitative data for me. Like, obviously there's analysts that do, research into this and say, oh, well, have you adopted anything in the last 12 to 24 months? So those things are out there. So my perspective is going to be a lot more anecdotal. I have seemingly two conflicting narratives pitched at me on a weekly basis, which is, one, every single software company and tech-enabled 3PL is seeing 200 to 300% growth year on year, right? Every single company tells me that. On the buyer side, I see definite eyes wide open, increased appetite, super discovery learning mode. But I don't necessarily hear them saying, oh, we've adopted 4 new systems this year. Very against character for us. We've bought all in on this, right? So there's some happy medium between there. I'm not talking to all of the customers of the companies that I talk to. They're obviously either off a really low baseline or they're embellishing numbers a little bit for whatever reason. So it's fine. Like, they're private. They can do whatever. They can say they have 1,000,000% growth. Doesn't change anything. But so the answer is yes. Everybody is, I think, taking this time to say what sort of got exposed as inadequate in the past year. What do I need to focus on? Whether that means I need to invest right this minute, or whether it means we have a kind of an emergency situation right now, but we're going to be tucking away budget for 2022 to actually address this. So yes, I would say it's rare as the company that's like, no, we're good. We saw everything coming. We are good to go. We've done our whole digital transformation end to end. We're ready for 2022. I've not come across any company that said that, whether it's a shipper, forwarder, carrier, port, whatever.
What have been the challenges in this? As you said, people's eyes are getting a little bit bigger. There's a little more eagerness. It sounds like people are preparing themselves to buy a few things because they know they have to do something different. But what have been the challenges? What has slowed that investment down in the past? Like what will the hurdles be that these companies have to clear to decide to make those bets?
So I'd say maybe three kind of factors. One is, does the logistics practitioner historically, have they had enough like clout or sway to make an investment? And that might be a small investment that kind of adds complexity to an existing system that they already use, or it might be like full rip and replace. Do they have the institutional reservoir of goodwill internally to make those decisions? Second would be a lot of we're into our third and fourth generation of logistics software. Some of those people have been through, in the buying roles, have been through multiple generations. They've been burned by things that have underdelivered, or things that were great for a few years and then the innovation kind of stalled and it became less valuable over time. And so I think they're a little wary of that. And then this historically, maybe I'd say this is all pre-pandemic. Then the third would be IT makes buying decisions, or IT has an outsized role in deciding what does or doesn't get approved. So I think what's changed a little bit in the pandemic is, there's just a lot more kind of lightweight systems that don't require a huge IT maintenance or any IT maintenance kind of role. Maybe security would be the big thing that they'd have to be mindful of. There's tons and tons. I mean, I think you're involved in this type of stuff. There's tons of kind of pre-packaged integrations that are happening so that the end user doesn't even need to think about, stitching things together anymore. Or if they do, it's a way less of a task than it was before. And then third, I think everybody's kind of on this digitization journey, right? Whether you're just starting out or you're nearing the end, that's kind of this ever-present thing across all enterprises, and supply chain is obviously revealed itself to be a big part of an enterprise these days. So it's just naturally going to get a little more attention. But historically, I would say those are the three kind of hindrances.
So in talking about, investing in technology, that digital transformation, the tech often is only going to be as good as the data you put into it. And people are out there searching for data, different types of data. Shippers have a certain perspective, forwarders have a different perspective, et cetera. But what are you hearing is in demand right now? What types of data? Is it like mode oriented? What are shippers looking for? What's the hot in demand data set at the moment? Or do people know what to ask for?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole spectrum. I think most people who spent any amount of time in logistics now know of visibility and in transit cargo visibility, especially if it's relevant to, especially if they're in charge of basically one mode or international or domestic. They'll understand, okay, it's kind of important to know where my shipments are and as a proxy know where my inventory is. I mean, certainly I can remember doing webinars a decade ago about this being about more than where's my stuff, right? Knowing where's my stuff is, it's like a kind of data point. It's not really anything you can do anything with. It's definitely transitioned into the expectation around predictive. So how do I use all of the different data that's available internally from outside parties to establish a somewhat reliable, if not extremely reliable, ETA. Now, you can provide an ETA for one leg of a move, but that's also of limited value, right? You really need, if it's an international move, you need ETA on the origin side, you need the ocean or air.
Essentially need an estimate for every planned event.
Exactly. So that's a more concise way of putting it than I would have said it. So that multimodal picture is what shippers desire. But I think, and this goes back to what I had said before about being burned a little bit, I still see them sort of tackling the data issue bit by bit. And I think it's because there's sort of an inherent prejudice against the idea that there can actually be one vendor that actually has all the data that they need across every mode and every geo around the world. Shippers
it's a fair thought. I mean, it's a challenge by itself just because of that natural fragmentation that happens again, right? There's just so many parties involved you're needing to source some kind of information from. But on the other hand, there are probably not many parties you would have to interface with to be able to get the vast majority of what you might be looking for nowadays. And there's also kind of a strategic consideration, right? You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket from like an infrastructure redundancy perspective, right? I want to make sure I have 2 or 3 vendors who actually have duplicate capabilities in case someone gets shut down for some reason, blah, blah, blah.
And I had mentioned before, like some shippers want to be in a position where they can verify the data that they're relying on against another vendor's data to make sure that if they're not exactly the same, that at least they know the variance and they can plan for around that variance, right? So,
right.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me to hear you say there's a lot of interest around predictive, and I've been hearing that. I've even worked on some of those problems previously. Do you think the industry is even ready for something predictive?
That's a great question. Maybe they want something that they can't really fully utilize. That wouldn't be the first time. That's a good question. I think of predictive anything, whether it's vessel arrival, whether it's like full end-to-end transit time predictions, whether it's predicted cost, whether it's predicted disruption. I feel like ultimately those things are best funneled into another system that makes decisions based on those predictions, right? Eventually that's where this is going. And I hope people are mindful and eyes open about that. Like human brains are not set up to like consider 1,000 what if scenarios with, extra permutations around the edges of all those scenarios. We're just not set up for that. So if you think about like, we are set up for, hey, there's a map with my stuff. I know where it is. That looks risky that I have too much on the water right now. I better do something about that. They're not set up to do, well, if this typhoon in Taiwan changes, if the wind speed increases by 15 miles per hour, that will set this shipment back. I can go through a million different what ifs, but
yeah, there's a host of things. And you're talking down a talk track that of a conversation I have frequently when the question of prediction comes up. The way I frame it is prediction should be your goal, but let's talk about the timeline to actually reach a usable version of that goal and the requirements to get there. And you were going through, and I'm wearing a little bit of a technical hat right now, but you were going through a list of data sources that are available in high granularity in real time. And so the first challenge in prediction is actually making sure you have machine readable, structured real-time data flows that are highly consistent, because prediction's only going to work well when you think of it more like your weather forecast. It helps you foresee high probability issues, but it's not always going to tell you what to do, right? It's better at helping you understand mitigation investments you should make. It's like prediction is going to allow, freight companies to function more like a hedge in some sense in their decision making, in their planning, et cetera. But when we talk about that, it's like, there is probably something usable on prediction around estimates in the next 5 years. But the challenge is much of what you see today is really not usable because we haven't solved the real-time granular data problem yet. Kind of like we barely get all of the events for a container delivered in a machine readable format. Like that. Like
you guys did some research on this earlier this year or last year, was it, where you said like there's a downfall of like the basic container.
Yeah, we just looked at like the basics, right? Like what do the ocean carriers provide on their web track and trace portal for the vast majority of people who are waiting for a shipment? Go and check, where is my shipment, right? Like that's the key place. And there's just gaps in the basics. Like you expect a certain amount of events to occur for every single shipment. Like you expect vessel arrives, vessel departs, right? You go to some track and traces, they don't even tell you vessel arrive, vessel depart. It'll tell you a discharge. It'll tell you a load. You may not see transshipment events, but like fundamental things, right? And so it gets to be very difficult if you think of, well, weather forecasts work so well because we have meteorologists with radar who are constantly scanning all the time. And they've been working on their machine learning models since the 60s and 70s because machine learning was invented in the meteorology industry, actually. So it's like I can understand, and you have to think about it that way too. Like the best use of that and how sophisticated and how much investment required is you got a better 10-day forecast. Like for your weather. So like start thinking about it from that perspective, not like I'll have every ETA under bulletproof always kind of thing. It's going to be more of how can I monitor what's happening and changing in real time faster than anyone else and try to make marginally smarter decisions along the way.
Well, and that's also a situation where the weather doesn't really care what its customers think of it too, right? So there's that added like element of commercial relationships.
Talk about additional complexity. Yeah. But to this topic of like our data that's of interest to people, I think you and I were chatting previously. Like, there's like, are some like shippers kind of focused on like what is their data like acquisition strategy in some sense? And I mean, it's easiest for the biggest players, right? Your Fortune 500s, they just have all the leverage. They say, give it to me, and the players come up with something and give it to them. But for like the rest of the industry, the rest of the market, mid-market, the long tail, what data sets are people looking for? Is it like, are they focused like, give me the ocean data set first, so let's talk about rail next? Or how are people going about climbing that hill?
I think it depends on the role, right? Like the roles at shippers especially have been so segmented that if you're in international logistics department, you're focusing on what you care about, and you're trying to acquire the data that informs your part of that shipment, right? So you're not necessarily don't care about what it does over the road, but your priority is to figure out an ETA on the ocean side so that you can be seen to be performing pretty well for your segment. Now, lines have started to blur a little bit, but you go to a big shipper and they will still be segmented into international logistics team and domestic logistics team, right? So it is piecemeal in that way, but I think they are all desirous of getting that end-to-end cross multi-mode door to door. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the end goal. And maybe they're just tackling it data provider by data provider, or they're going to a company that aggregates and originates some of its own, but aggregates from elsewhere and is in the process of trying to, provide this end-to-end map. But the data sets are definitely, I see, very mode specific, because there's just not a lot of companies that are yet still segmented in a way that's looking, there's not someone who's like a data manager for the life cycle of a shipment.
Right.
That role is emerging, but it's not there yet.
And so data quality is important, data completeness, latency, et cetera, et cetera. The data is one part. The technology for being able to consume it or use it in some way is another part. How much do you think global logistics has been, and I'll put this in air quotes, turned into a platform? Platform-Ization has happened. How much Where are we today in saying that there are even platforms for global logistics technology?
Still very, very little.
What's a platform? That might be a good question for our audience too.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of a platform that was pretty and is still pretty predominant is Intra, right? Okay, so Intra started off as a carrier-led initiative to basically make bookings and shipping instruction submission happen over the web, which was a crazy ass idea in the early 2000s that people were super skeptical of. And it really, I mean, I can remember reporting on them in 2006 and people and some of the other portals going, yeah, we still have to convince people that this is the right way to do this, right? So I would say that is the platform that is most synonymous with the ocean carrier business. If you look more broadly at like commerce
and a platform from the perspective of like, are people building stuff on top of Intra? They're using EDI and API, they're placing bookings, they're getting tracking,
and they're using it. Yeah, they're using that as a like a stepping stone almost. Like, I mean, really, the platform economy didn't exist when Intra came. It was a portal, right? That got sort of rebranded as a platform, and a very useful one at the time. But you're right. Platform as the foundation upon for other applications and outside applications to plug into and be available to. I mean, I think we have to look at Amazon, right? Amazon is the one that's sort of totally reoriented people's ideas about that. Maybe Salesforce a little bit, but Salesforce still has a relatively low, kind of impact on the logistics industry. So yeah,
maybe an example of a good kind of recently, maybe like second generation or launch, depending, just the number of AIS players that have really popped up in the last few years and really kind of turning it more into platform. And it's a hot topic with vessel tracking being so much in demand right now. Maybe that's a good example of kind of platforms as well, or
I don't know. I don't see the AI. And look, my parent company, IHS Markit, has its own AIS solution, right? So I maybe my colleagues will disagree with me, but I don't necessarily see an AIS data set as a platform. I would say it's something that would feed into a platform and allow you to use another application with another set of information infusing it, right? Like, so a platform to me is something that multiple parties provide into and take out of. AIS, I don't know, that's like more of like a baked data set that you would use in tandem with something else, right? And yeah, it's AIS alone is back to that right? Information. But the AIS in tandem with a bunch of other things gets super interesting. So I think we're headed the way of platformization. It's still unclear what those platforms will be. And I think given logistics' history, there's no way it's a single platform. It's probably it's going to be fractured. Dozens of platforms, right? And it's just how interoperable they are with one another. That's probably the most important.
This is a biased perspective, but if there's a chance at being a more global platform, I think it might only exist at the data layer.
I'm not.
It's because it's kind of a common denominator, right? It's it's like gas is gas is gas.
So yeah, that's very interesting. See, this is like Lars. You're making me think about things from a different perspective. So I will reconsider what is a platform. Yeah, I mean, if a platform is, if you could say a platform is a basic, data set or language or.
Yeah, it might maybe just like technology or service that's used to build other solutions in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So like Intra, excellent example, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to go out and try and build my new digital forwarder. And I could use something like Intra and be like, okay, I want to try and place my bookings and get some tracking data so I can create a portal for my customers.
That's right. Use. And that's what they did. They white labeled their solutions to a bunch of forwarders, right? So they were the platform for those forwarders. So yeah, there you go.
Now,
your question was how far. We're not very far along. I feel like we're very much in the infancy of the platformization of the logistics industry. Because if you have 100 guests onto this show and ask them what their system infrastructure looks like, you will get 100 diametrically opposed.
Yeah, it'll be 100 unique configurations.
Yes, 100%.
Yes, and on this point of kind of platforming or platforms emerging, what do you think is important for the industry to know about platforms, like technology platforms, like the people seeking solutions? How do they even know to consider a platform as a solution, or know where to even start Googling to look for answers, right? Like what is a platform to someone who has a problem?
I don't think you can Google logistics platform and get a solution or a resolution that you're looking for. You're probably going to get led down a path of someone who's really good at marketing and not necessarily good at solutions. So I would say platform really is almost like a word of mouth thing more than anything else. Like, it has to be something that you feel left out by not being involved with, or a certain proportion of the partners that you work with are using it. And so it's like a no-brainer to be involved in it. In terms of what to expect going into using a platform, you should be super eyes wide open about what the platform gets out of your involvement. And you should also not necessarily overestimate your value to the platform, and stay away from it just because you think your data is way more valuable than anybody else's, because it's probably not. It's probably way less valuable than you think. It's probably much more valuable in the context of the platform than it is on its own.
One last question for you. And so I've gone to TPM several times, but this is the first year for TPM Tech. Can you tell us a little bit about this? I know it's kind of hosted by JOC, IHS. It lives underneath that umbrella. So can you tell us about what is TPM Tech, being that it's the first year it's happening?
Yeah, so thanks for mentioning this. I spend a lot of my time these days putting together the program for TPM Tech, it's the 2 days prior to TPM, end of next February, 2022 in Long Beach. If you think about it, we put on a conference in Las Vegas for 2 years called LogTech, and the TPM that we had to unfortunately cancel in early 2020 due to COVID, we were going to be starting a new event called El Dorado, which was actually sort of an event inside an event. It was a set of programming that was concurrent with TPM, but it was very tech focused, and LogTech was all about tech. So TPM Tech is kind of a combo of those two things, but a separate event ahead of TPM. And how is it different? It's not that we're not going to talk about technology at TPM. TPM Tech is just too ubiquitous and too important to ignore as a part of bigger discussions. The way I have been sort of framing this for people is, when we talk about tech at TPM, it's likely going to be, how do we solve the congestion issue in the next 6 to 9 months? How do we figure out a way that carriers can invoice shippers more effectively right now? TPM Tech is, where is this industry going to be in 2 to 5 years from a technology perspective? Like, we're looking way further out. We're talking about topics that would make people at TPM's eyes glaze over a little bit, potentially. And we're getting a little deeper into some wrinkles of technology that, belong at a tech conference and not necessarily at a sort of, industry conference writ large. So that's the way I think of this. And basically it's an excuse for me to bring all the people, the amazing people that I get to talk to on a yearly basis, together in the same room and cook up something even cooler than they already have. That's my goal.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to attending. At full disclosure, we're my company Vision. We're one of multiple sponsors of the event, but I'm quite excited to see it unfold. I never got to go to a LogTech in Vegas, so is all going to be new to me, but very much looking forward to it. And Eric, thank you for making time to share your thoughts, answer our questions. And, clearly you care about this industry quite a lot. And thank you for, sharing everything you know here on Full of Ship.
Thanks, Kyle. Really appreciate having me on, and look forward to talking to you again soon, and see you at TPM Tech, if not before then.
See you there. Cheers, man. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining Kyle and his guest on the Full of Ship podcast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time as Kyle continues to demystify ocean carrier tracking with his future guests.